Morning, everyone. It was a great dinner last night, and thank you to the people I was sat with for making me feel very welcome. A small declaration before I start, and please bear with me. I'm feeling quite jet-lagged, so I set off from the UK last Sunday, flew over to Singapore, spent some time in Singapore with colleagues, then over to Brisbane to see Cognitive Institutes, spent some time with them, and flew into Wellington yesterday, and it's good to be here. But I'm a bit jet-lagged, and therefore the consequence might be I might fluff my lines a bit. I might not be as coherent as I think I am. But it's of maybe a small embarrassment to me, but it's of pretty little consequence. But what if I was a doctor? What if I was working with you, and what if I was going to do patient care today? Would the culture of your organization say, that's all right, Simon's pretty good, he's a senior chap, let him get on with it? What if I was about to make a mistake? Would the culture of your organization get someone who was junior to put their hand up and say, Simon, I think you should stop now. That's not the way to do it, or that's not right in these circumstances. So I'll just leave those with you for the moment, and I will come back to those themes in a little while. So the brief I've got from Ian is to speak for 25, 30 minutes, and then to have 20 minutes, 15 minutes for questions, and I'm very happy for that. I'd like to talk a little bit about MPS and MPS in New Zealand, something around the challenges that I think are facing healthcare in many developed countries. The cost of avoidable harm, and I know that's borne here by the ACC, not quite so directly by members, but I think it might be interesting for you. And some of the work that MPS is doing in conjunction with our subsidiary Cognitive to reduce avoidable harm. So MPS is the world's leading medical protection organization. We're a not-for-profit organization, so all the money that our members pay to us is retained within the organization for the benefit of members. We have no third-party shareholders or anything else, and we're a mutual. We're owned by you, our members. And we have a highly qualified staff. We've got over 220 doctors, dentists, lawyers, and specialist claims handlers around the world who are there just to provide service to our members with claims, with advice, with anything that they need arising out of their professional practice. And for us, being supportive of patient safety, of trying to reduce avoidable harm is a very important aspect to what we do. And I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. So this year we're celebrating 125 years. We were founded in 1892. We've got more than 300,000 members around the world in mainly 10 different countries. So obviously New Zealand, the UK, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, Ireland, and South Africa. They're the big ones. And then we've got quite a lot of business in the Caribbean, Barbados, Bermuda, Jamaica. Everyone fights to go and visit those countries. We have some business in Australia for dentists. It's not indemnity, as here it's more advisory. So let's just say a little bit about our services. Obviously, outside of New Zealand, the main service that our members are concerned about is an indemnity for claims of negligence. This could be incredibly expensive. It could absolutely bankrupt them. And so that is probably the primary driver why a lot of members outside of New Zealand would take up MPS membership. Claims for indemnity are actually about 20% of our business, but they're 80% of our cost because it's damages, it's settlements, it's compensation to patients, and that can be very expensive. Whereas what we call non-indemnity, non-claims, those are things arising out of your professional practice that is pretty much everything that isn't a claim of negligence. So that's about 80% of our workload. That's by far the largest amount of our caseload. But because there's no settlements involved, there are legal costs maybe, but no settlements, then it's probably only about 20% of our cost. And these are things like supporting members who've been reported to the regulator, supporting members who've got to appear before a coroner's court, dealing with complaints, and obviously here in New Zealand it's the HDC as well. And then we have a wide range of advisory services. So 24-hour helpline we provide to all of our members, and you can call at any time for assistance. And that's with things that can be dealt with often in the moment. So a matter of consent, something that's ethical, something around privacy issues, those sorts of elements. And then education and risk management, which I will come back to, is another theme. Lobbying is also important. as such as it's a matter that coincides with the best interest of the profession and the interests of what MPS is here to do, then we think that's part of a role we would play. So at the moment, we're working with the Medical Council in New Zealand to try and clarify their policy on treating family and friends, which we think is rather confused. We're working with the ACC on issues around expert opinions. And further afield, in the UK, in Ireland and South Africa, we're promoting tort law reform. The cost of indemnity in these countries is getting very high, and it's harming the availability of medicine, and it's a cost to society. And we're trying to promote a discussion around ways to address that through tort law reform. And as already been mentioned, we provide a confidential counselling service to all of our members around the world, because we recognise that if you've got a claim of negligence or even a complaint, it can be extremely stressful, and some members need that extra support to help get them through that, and we're very pleased to provide that. So very specifically in New Zealand, some of the work we do. So we've been offering the benefits of membership to doctors and dentists in New Zealand for something around 60 years. And we've got 16,600 members. The majority are doctors, 13,300 doctors. We've got 8 medico-legal advisors who provide you with the service. That's a 4.5 full-time equivalent. We've got a lot of open files and case calls. So 5,000 advice calls a year, 3,400 open cases, with about 1,800 being opened a year. That's a lot. That's an 8% increase year on year since 2013. So for the size of the medical population compared to elsewhere in the world, that is quite a lot. And I think it's a reflection of the fact that there is a complex and extensive mechanism of holding doctors to account in New Zealand. I suspect it's grown up because your patients can't sue you, because it's no-fault compensation, and they're looking for another way of holding you to account. And we saw something similar in Australia in 2003. In 2003, Australia introduced some very extensive tort law reform, which meant that patients were finding it much harder to sue their doctor. And the number of claims, the number of lawsuits against doctors plummeted. But at the same time, we saw a big and almost commensurate rise in the complaints against doctors. And I think it wasn't a coincidence. I think they were very much linked. So if we look at the cases we've got in New Zealand, about 50% come from the Auckland and Waikato region, about 27 from Central and Wellington, and about 23 from the South Island. And if we look at those cases by medical specialty, we can see that about half come from GPs, and about 47% from specialists, with 3% coming from other. And within the specialists, the highest sort of reflected specialty is psychiatry, followed by obstetrics and gynecology, and then anaesthetists. So this is just a breakdown of our current open cases. HDC is the largest, only just, but it's growing. I was looking at some figures yesterday, and the number of complaints against doctors to the HDC is growing year on year. And I was told that it takes about 2 years to resolve a claim. That's a huge amount of time. I mean, it's costly, but it's also the stress that is involved on you. And I understand that our attempts to try and engage with some of the people at the top of the HDC have been not as successful as we would like, but we continue to work on that. So complaints are anything that is made direct to the practice, to the clinic or the DHB. And obviously a complaint can go on to the Medical Council or the ACC. And advice can be a huge range of things, but if I just give you an example of 3 things. So someone wanted advice on how they could delist a patient whose behaviour they found unacceptable. Someone wanted advice on how to respond under the Vulnerable Children Act, and someone else wanted advice on the fact that they had to give a police statement, and they wanted some help around that. So that's a breakdown of the work that we have on our books in New Zealand. So as I travel around the world, meeting members, attending conferences, there's a lot of common themes that I pick up. It's not scientific, it's anecdotal, about the challenges facing healthcare in the developed countries. Cost of indemnity, maybe not quite so relevant here, but I hope the rest of these items here are things that resonate to a degree in New Zealand. But it's the cost of indemnity that I'd like to share with you now, some examples of outside of New Zealand, just to give you a flavour of what other countries are facing. And of course, you have avoidable harm. It exists. It's just dealt with through the ACC, and there is a cost to that, and that is borne by a contribution that is made by you individually and by collective organisations. But it's dealt with in a different way to most, in fact, all the other countries in which MPS operates. So let's look at the UK. The figures here are for England for public hospitals. So the estimated current value cost of all claims that will arise out of adverse incidents that have already happened is 123 billion New Zealand dollars. So if the NHS was to stop treating everybody today and was to run those claims off from an adverse incident that has already happened, it's estimated in current money terms that it's going to cost 123 billion. That is a huge sum of money. It's increased by 127% in the last 2 years. That's a little artificial because there was a technical change to the valuation, but it's been increasing at least 10% a year. And that is much faster than the growth of funds in the NHS, much faster than the growth of the country to afford it. So there's definitely a problem on the way. Some would say it's already arrived. And let me give you an example. This was a case reported in a newspaper the other day. It's always sad cases when you're talking about significant sums of compensation. But it was a girl who was severely brain damaged at birth, and it was held negligent, and she was awarded compensation. Now, she'll probably live for 60 to 70 years because such is the ability of modern medicine to keep these individuals alive. She's going to need a full care package, 24 hours a day to look after her. The sum of compensation is $43 million. And that is just one example. And what happens is that girl will go out and buy an individual care package for herself. She won't share it with anybody else. So here, I understand, the ACC will be responsible for funding these rehabilitation and care packages, but they will be shared across a number of people who need it. And personally, I think that's probably a much better approach. What we're doing in the UK, and in fact most other countries in which MPS operates, is we're paying money out to fund the ability of someone to buy an individual care package. And here's an example of how it goes. An individual gets this money, and it's a child, and she's living with her parents. I'm not saying this is the case of the one I just quoted, but this is actually what can happen. They have the whole house redone, remodeled. They have a hydrotherapy pool put in, and then suddenly the parents divorce. It's very stressful looking after someone with those needs, even with the care. And then you find we've got to do it all over again. We've got to do it for a second house because the child has to be able to go to visit each parent. And that's just an example of how costs can escalate and the challenges that are faced. Ireland is similar. Of course, don't forget England is 60 million people, whereas Ireland is only about 4 million people. So the costs are less, but it's exactly the same. Ireland is probably the most litigious country in which we operate. They'll sue for anything in Ireland. And it's a 42% increase year on year in Ireland. So again, they're facing real challenges. And the same is in South Africa. They're looking at 25% increase year on year. And they're just absolute. These are in the public sector. Obviously, the same applies to MPS. We tend to do GPs and we tend to do private sector. But we're seeing these same sorts of figures as well. But there's one other element that I draw to your attention. Because the ACC is non-contested, you can get there, you don't need to litigate. But in all these other countries, litigation is necessary. Not every case goes to court, but lawyers are appointed. And let me give you some figures for the NHS. So in 2016-17, the NHS paid out $3 billion for claimant costs. 38% of that went to lawyers. And if you look at the smaller value claims, so claims that are valued under $200,000, more than half, 53% of the total cost of settling those claims goes to lawyers. That's both the claimant lawyer and the defense lawyer, but it's lawyers. And that's hugely expensive and a leakage on the system, which you don't have here. So that's something to be pleased about, I think. And there's a lot of work going on in the UK to see how we can control that legal spend. But it doesn't really matter what the structure of the of the healthcare delivery system, how much money within reason is spent. Avoidable harm happens. And the challenges of healthcare is how to reduce that incident of avoidable harm. And in general, there's focus on two elements: processes and systems, and culture and people. And whilst MPS does some work in process and systems, the most amount of work we do, together with our subsidiary Cognitive Institute in Brisbane, is we work on culture and people. And we do that at both the individual member level, and I'll say a bit more about that, but increasingly we're doing it at the healthcare system level. So individual member level, the work we do, this is the mechanism in which we deliver our education and risk management. And that education and risk management covers 5 main areas: medico-legal, professional and ethics, communication and interpersonal skills, systems and processes, and clinical risk management. And I hope many of you in this room have attended our workshops. We deliver workshops on a range of topics. I've just picked out 3 here: mastering adverse outcomes, mastering your risk, and mastering shared decision-making. And the feedback we get from members who go on these, which are provided as part of your membership, is extremely positive. So we continue to provide this individual member-focused education and risk management. And this shows that in the last 8 years, we've delivered 6,800 of these workshops. This is just the workshops. There's a whole range of other stuff, to 115,000 members. Now, I don't know, but I suspect that could well make us one of the largest non-clinical educators of doctors in the world, but I don't know about that. Before I move on, a small apology if anyone's from South Africa. I'm informed since I presented these slides that the South African flag is up the wrong way. The blue bit at the top should be at the bottom and the red should be reversed, so apologies from anyone there. So in healthcare generally, globally, there's a move, there's change happening. It's changed from a cottage industry to a corporate, from individual clinician to systems and teams, from process-based funding to outcomes-based funding, and from unconstrained costs to constrained costs. And there are many drivers for this, but patient safety is absolutely one of those. And let me give you an example from the UK again recently. There was a breast surgeon, name of Ian Patterson. He treated patients both in the public sector and the private sector. And he was found guilty in court and sentenced to prison for doing unnecessary operations on hundreds and hundreds of women. In the NHS, it was indemnified by the state. But in the private sector, the indemnifier of the doctor, not MPS I'm pleased to say, said this was intentional criminal activity and it's not right that we should indemnify the member or compensate the patients. But what is more is the private hospital he was working at said, he's not an employee, we are not accountable for his actions, we will not provide an indemnity to him or compensation to his patients. And that is staggering, that in this day and age, a private hospital who is providing the facilities and everything else does not feel that they are accountable for the actions of a surgeon working in that hospital. And I think that is going to be a significant change in patient safety, private delivery of medicine in the UK. I think people are going to look at that and the private hospitals are going to be held ever more accountable for the work that's done under their roofs in the name of patient safety. And I think that's absolutely right. But I think it'll create a major change in the relationship between the independent consultants and those private hospitals. So MPS and Cognitive are working to build a culture that is safe for patients and members. And let me talk to you a little bit about that. I hope some of you are familiar with our Speaking Up for Safety initiative. This is run by Cognitive, and it's a drive to transform and build a culture of safety and reliability. We've got more than 100 hospitals taking part. They're either active or they're signed up to take part. In New Zealand, in Australia and Singapore, and I'm very pleased to say that recently we signed up Great Ormond Street Hospital as the first in the UK. When I wrote this slide, we had 6 DHBs who'd already signed up or were active, and I'm told that a few more have signed up since then, which is extremely pleasing because this initiative was really only launched in March, and it certainly grabbed a lot of interest. So why MPS? Well, I think we're uniquely positioned to undertake this work. We're an international organisation with international membership. We're an indemnifier, therefore we've got a vested interest in reducing avoidable harm. We employ doctors, we understand the profession, we understand medicine, and we're owned by doctors. And this is only going to be achieved through a partnership of leadership, of management, of clinicians, of unions, and professional organisations. And I think MPS is well placed because of that role we have in the wider profession of facilitating the creation of that local partnership necessary to achieve that clinical transformation of improved safety and reliability. So this slide is issued with permission of the Safe and Reliable Healthcare in Boston. In the past 20 to 30 years, a lot of effort has been done in healthcare to move us from level 2 reactive to level 3 systematic. And I would suggest that in most healthcare organisations, they're at level 3 at the moment. But the next challenge is how to move to level 4. And the Speaking Up for Safety programme is to achieve that transformation in culture. It's already been achieved in the airline industry. The airline industry, good airlines like Air New Zealand, British Airways, they absolutely have a culture of speaking up, and they do that, and they're already at level 4. We've got to work hard to make sure that the healthcare system can be at that. It's not uncommon that at the moment something's about to go wrong, 30 to 40% of the healthcare team feel that they cannot speak up. They know something's about to go wrong, that they just cannot speak up about it to everybody. They might be able to speak up to a large number of people, but there'll be some people who they just don't feel comfortable speaking up to. 30 to 40%, that's a huge number, and we've got to change that. It's going to take 7 to 10 years to embed level 4 in healthcare, but it's absolutely necessary, and it should be a tipping point for the improvement of patient safety. So let me share with you now just a little bit more detail about this Speaking Up for Safety programme. It's got 2 elements, the Safety Code and the Promoting Professional Accountability programme. The Safety Code has been developed by Cognitive Institute. The Promoting Professional Accountability programme has been developed by Vanderbilt University in the States, and we operate it on their behalf, as it were, outside of the States. So there's 2 elements. The Safety Code is speaking up in the moment, speaking up at that moment that something's about to go wrong, making sure that you can do it. And there's 2 things. You shouldn't need courage to speak up if you think something's about to go wrong. It should be accepted of you as part of your job, but sadly that isn't always the case. And it's necessary to give people the language, because they might have the ability to speak up, but if you don't frame it in the right language, it may not be received in the right way. So it's all about developing a language and a structure that people can speak up. And then it's about the recipient. The recipient has to receive it in the right way. Otherwise, people aren't going to speak up. So it's on both sides of the equation that this safety code works. And then the Vanderbilt is more pervasive in the culture. There is no good in giving people the ability to speak up at a moment in time of potential harm if the whole culture that pervades the rest of their working day is there to try and stop them speaking up. And if I can use just one example, there was a UK surgeon who was being interviewed on television the other day. And I'm not suggesting this is representative of New Zealand, but it certainly exists in the UK. And he said, well, it's my name on the paperwork at the bottom of the patient's bed. Therefore, it's my way or the highway, which is not really a team-orientated approach. And if he said that to a junior doctor or a junior nurse outside of a particular moment of harm, what's that junior doctor or junior nurse going to think of in the moment of harm? They're going to think, I can't possibly speak up. Not to this individual. So that culture of that organization is wrong. And so the promoting professional accountability works at the top of organization to work out what is acceptable behavior and what isn't, and making sure that that is articulated and reinforced throughout the organization so that the culture of the organization is always there, supportive and reinforcing of speaking up. So this is just some marketing material that is already up and running, some promotional material that has been produced, and this is at Wanganui that's already operating the safety code and the Speaking Up for Culture initiative with Cognitive. So what about some success? This is a slide from KKK, which is a tertiary pediatric and obstetric hospital in Singapore. they trained 80% of their staff in the Speaking Up for Culture initiative in 12 months. And when I say 80% of staff, that's all staff. That's not just clinicians, that is everybody who works in the hospital, because it's important that everybody needs to be part of this initiative. And this is quite a simple success measure. This is something they particularly had a focus on. This is hand hygiene. And you can see that they were quite successful, particularly in the CICU, in improving the rates of hand hygiene, because more junior staff felt empowered and able to challenge more senior staff if they'd seen them not wash their hands, as it were. And Royal Melbourne Hospital, who were one of the first adopters of this, have also got some good data on success, but they're not in a position to publish it yet, so I can't share it with you, but I hope when it's published that you'll get to see it. So in conclusion, transformation to a higher culture of safety arises from intentional activity. It doesn't happen with slogans, with platitudes, with short-term initiatives. It happens from really hard work, skillfully executed. And MPS is proud, with Cognitive, of its role to assist organisations to create a culture of high safety and reliability for the benefit of not only patients, but our members as well, because the higher that level of safety and reliability, the more confident you are in the work you do. So that's all from me. Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to take questions.